javelins, freelancers, ladies, gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another report from Anthem Universe. I am one of your hosts, Ogaz, and today we are reflecting on Fort Tarsis, in particular the evolution of Fort Tarsis from 2017 until now. What's old, what's fresh, new lore, and of course, some of our concerns with Tarsis as it stands right now. Now, in context of this conversation is the recent footage from IGN inside Fort Tarsis, along with what we've seen with our early game testing and in the footage that we captured from the Fort Tarsis stream back in November. So it's going to be some interesting comparisons, transitions, and finding out where this new lore is taking us inside Fort Tarsis. Now, the gameplay footage of IGN, of course, begins in the Enclave, which is the area that you walk out from those first doors. And just of interest here on the right, you'll notice from a bit of lore, you hear a NPC say, "I don't trust those new freelancers." Now later on you hear the same dialogue tree with another NPC, and two of them are actually talking, and one replies, "I put my faith in Sentinels, not in the freelancers." So again, that's a reminder for the lore of Tarsis. The beauty of this world is that you are actually, you might have been a former glory, but not anymore. Freelancers are not recognized as the love that they once were, and it's quite clear that citizens around you put their faith in the protection of the Sentinels, in the Sentinels' capability of protecting Fort Tarsis. Of course, freelancers are known to be a little bit more, shall we say, flexible in their principles and willing to go beyond the wall, something the Sentinels really don't believe in. So we're going to find more about that shortly. So I just thought that was an interesting dialogue tree just from the very, very first scene. Now I'm going to hit play as we walk through and we can see the inside of Tarsis. Now we've never seen, just to skim back on this point, we've never actually seen this part of Tarsis. It gives you a little bit more of the world. You can see some construction scaffolding in the background there. So there's this constant real world. There's vines and things growing across Tarsis. You get this old world feel, but of course again that this is a very lived in city, and something that we were expecting, of course, way back in 2017 when we saw the first bazaar and the first marketplace of Fort Tarsis. But I do like this shot as we pan around next into something we have seen before, of course just stopping there for a moment, and of course the Striders in Fort Tarsis. They dock on the outside of Fort Tarsis and for repairs and for supplies, and be interested to see that mechanic and what's involved with that further in the game as we see more. Now we're seeing, of course, the envision up through Tarsis, the marketplace itself, the bazaar, and the vault, which will be coming up onto the left, as well as a good friend called Prospero, who we'll meet shortly, whose actual area is up on the left here. Of course, straight ahead from you is the forge. You'll get used to this walk, I suspect, freelancers. You're going to be walking down this passage quite a lot. And of course the mighty Colossus that looks like there in the forge. Great shot down, of course, onto the forge there. That wonderful position there of the stairwells flanking each side of the Colossus. And of course you notice there on the left, the engineers working hard at the forge itself. You might recall the very first time, June 2017, you saw these guys in a sneak trailer, and here they are, of course, again, working hard for the freelancers. Great shot here of Owen that you can see here, the detail, the nuance of his animation, his facial expressions. It is quite clear that there has been further work, or at least we're seeing the later builds than we're used to, and it's good to see Owen a little less stoic and a little bit more expressive than he was previously. Again, a nice shot here, a color change, you'll note, of course, of the Colossus you're seeing there. I'm liking that skin. It's a very kind of patriotic, it could be the American flag, could it be France? I don't know, it could be either of those, but a very patriotic looking suit over there, Captain America, if you will, from the Colossus viewpoint. Of course, our friend Zoe, or shall I say Zoe, as it's pronounced in-game, is very prominent here. Now, before we get there, notice in the top right, launch free play via the Expedition start screen. Now this, I'm hoping, based on previous builds that I've played, will allow you to directly launch via a shortcut into an expedition and to go straight into free play. Of course, what you don't want to be doing is having to enter the forge, jump into the suit, and then jump into the menu screen and then pick a location. If you've already got an active expedition happening in free play, it would be wonderful to just jump straight back into that, and I'm presuming that shortcut at the top there, or that on-screen part of your HUD, is providing you with that option. Now, the builds that I have played did not have that option available, but it's good to see some slight transitions and quality of life improvements in Anthem. Now, of course, you'll see here the conversation with Zoe. Again, not going to spend too long on the conversation with Zoe herself, but she does give you some interesting insights into her background. Now, Zoe is our Forge Master, if you will, and you'll notice some contextual conversations here, particularly pertaining to the Lost Arcanist mission and Matthias. Notice, of course, here that we lose the wheel that you might be familiar with. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but you won't have the full dialogue wheel that you're used to perhaps in Mass Effect, but you will have more binary choices and binary decisions. Now, we'll see another one shortly with the leader of the Sentinels as well, which I actually think is actually more interesting. You can see how the dialogue choices do actually bear impact on what's about to happen. So interesting to see there, but of course, again, LT and RT. We find out in this conversation, by the way, that Zoe is a mother. She was in fact on a Strider. Now, of course, a Strider, as we know, are the forward base of operations, the four-leg AT-ATs from Star Wars. She says she's based out of Helios. Now, we do know that Helios is a location inside Anthem, but one thing to note is that Owen Corley, now Owen, you might remember, who we've just met previously, Owen is one of the ciphers who helps support the freelancers out in the field, and no doubt you've heard his dapper English voice in previous gameplay. Now, he's also from Helios, so that means both Zoe and Owen are both from Helios, and therefore, obviously Owen has left Helios previously. Zoe, in this case, has fled Helios as well. She also mentions that she's heading to Anthem. Now, Anthem is where Faye Naveen is from, so Faye is the other cipher who you may have met in previous gameplay trailers. So that's kind of interesting to hear. So she was actually heading towards Anthem, a city that Faye is from, but unfortunately references a cataclysm that occurs. The sky turns yellow and the ground changes underneath us, says she. And so it's interesting to note that obviously Fort Tarsis is a beacon. You know, it becomes this almost a sanctuary, or a refuge, a fort of solitude for those struggling beyond the war. And so I like the idea that Zoe's sort of come to Fort Tarsis with these skill sets, and clearly has been able to obviously adapt to the world around her. Now, of course, moving on from there, we get to see some insights into the Vault, and in particular a Cortex Codex entry here in relation to the Interceptor. Nothing too grand for most. If you are new to Anthem, this might be of interest to you, but by and large it didn't provide any great new information. We do know, of course, that Interceptor is linked to the Corvus faction, which is the assassin secret guild, if you will, of Anthem. Now, interestingly, on the following screen, no doubt you'll see the weapon list. We are familiar with these weapons already, but it's good to see the latest build of the game here. The UI has changed, certainly the navigation tools have changed. This is much cleaner than the version that I've played, so I will 100% say there's been some significant improvements here, in particular how the guns are categorized, and more importantly, on the next screen you'll see this right here, components. So if you remember, components are the gear pieces. Each javelin, of course, has 3 component gear slots, and those components here are nicely categorized. For those that played good old Mass Effect, you will obviously very much appreciate the order and beauty of the presentation you see here. You have the basic being your universal pieces, and of course the individual components for the relevant javelins thereafter. On the following screen we see some more elements, specifically the 3 gear sets for the Colossus, and no doubt this is definitely the Colossus because you'll see here the common heavy assault launcher amongst others. Now, the next screen, of course, we also see crafting. Now, for those that are min-maxing, going past Grandmaster level 2 and Grandmaster level 3, you're going to be taking some things very seriously. I suspect you'll be in here a lot, in particular trying to craft your weapons, knowing of course that you cannot re-roll weapons in Anthem. You will obviously need to leverage the crafting items to do that. Now, moving on, we'll get to see our good friend Prospero. Now, Prospero here is a trader. Now, he looks after the sexiness of your javelin. Now, the interesting part about this conversation is that he eventually gets down to the point of a mission that he's sending you on, and it sounds like a bit of a collectathon. So I'm just going to skip forward on this for a moment as we get to it. But he basically sends you on a mission here called Lighting a Fire, and that mission there, of course, is the idea of collecting amber pieces. So you have to collect amber pieces in order to unlock the forge element here, so that you can then obviously build and create and give Prospero the ability to provide you with sexy, cool items. Now, I love this for 2 reasons. One, it gives motivation to engage the story to improve your javelin. So obviously it is another collectathon. It's going to be go out there and collect amber, I get it. But I like in that it's actually core benefits to how they present it here. One is it's the motivation to engage story to improve your javelin, but 2, it has this kind of real overworld medieval reason. You know, it's almost like we've seen this before with Fort Tarsis. There's this great medieval element to what Fort Tarsis represents. Technology meets the old. And I think that sits well here, this idea that you have to actually light the fires, if you will, of the tools of Prospero so that he can now engage and improve your javelin. Anyway, that was the best part that we saw, I think, from Prospero, and indeed a little bit of lore there where you see here, they'll show you a picture of the amber, and as you can see, the naturally occurring dangerous byproduct of Anthem. So this sounds like some dark matter or something, you know, like it's the byproduct of the Anthem of creation that the humans have managed to leverage in some way. Now, moving on from here, there was a scene that we see shortly with Commander Vol. He is the leader of the Sentinels, if you will. Now, the interesting part about the conversation here is the chap to his right is actually advised to go to the north wall and to repair it. Something small, alright, but a little bit of lore here. The idea, of course, that there's something happened at the wall, and obviously this is something that has to be rectified. Was it Scar? Was it a Strider malfunction? Did something happen? Did the Dominion try and attack? Like, who was it? Now, I presume it's a Scar attack, because we find out shortly when we talk to the commander that indeed there's many Scar about, and perhaps that's a reason probably for what's been going on at Fort Tarsis. Now, interestingly enough, the conversation here with Commander Vor also creates a bit of excitement for me. You see again the binary choices between the dialogue conversations we mentioned earlier, except this time there appears to be a subtle, at least I guess a subtle form of dynamics in the conversation. In particular, you'll find out here just where the commander actually says to you, your best isn't enough, almost challenging you. And you can either go with a very humble response or a very sort of cynical, confident approach. Now, in this case, the choice is made for the humble answer on the left, and of course the response there is very typical of Mass Effect games, nothing grandiose. It's a little bit forced because the guy actually calls it out. He actually says, the direct approach. I like that. And you know, I get that, and I understand that he's trying to sort of emphasize the decisions that you've made, but it also calls it out a little bit awkwardly, in my opinion. But we'll see. We'll see how this new system works with the binary choices of dialogue. I am partial to Mass Effect purely because of, I mean, everyone is, right? The dialogue tree was so good with that game. But to be fair, let's see how it comes. Now, moving on from the conversation with the commander, we get to see an insight into the Alliance system. Now, it's a very brief insight. It doesn't really give us a lot of information. Obviously, this gives us assurance that there's going to be dailies and weeklies in terms of activities we have to do. There's a contributor bonus, which is basically the weekly contributor bonus, and I'm sure you're all going to be signed up to Anthem Universe. If you're not, make sure you are, which is discord.anthemuniverse.com, to have the conversation and be part of the future Alliance. You'll notice that there is reset and there is tiers up the top there. You'll get one more piece of information here on the right in a moment, and that is when we click on daily trials and weekly trials, and you'll see an example here of Dominion, Outlaw, and World events. Very simple examples of activities where you've got to kill a certain number of enemy. Now, it is quite clear this is very early on, and I suspect BioWare are still working hard at shaping what this part of the game looks like. Now we get to see the Enclave once again, and importantly we get taken to an area that we never could go to before. We could never get up here. In the previous builds we've played in, it's always been the doors that have been sealed, but we get a chance to go there in a moment, and we get to see more detail from Tarsus. Now the door takes us through this section up the stairs into Tarsus, and this will unlock for you later on as the game progresses. Note just one point there at the top right is Bryn's final missing Sentinel. So this is, of course, if you know who Bryn essentially is one of the Sentinels who looks after the monitoring of scars in Fort Tarsis, and you can see here this is one of the mission sets. No doubt we'll be working with Bryn, one of the Sentinels, during the game. Interesting point here, we get to see the bar in action, of course some dialogue, some conversations, and some extra life to Fort Tarsis that I'm looking forward to seeing, no doubt. That's probably most of the footage that we are interested in seeing here from Tarsus. It's interesting to note how Tarsus has developed. I think it's quite clear that Tarsus has improved significantly since we last saw it in November in the previous builds, and unfortunately that was hampered by frame rate challenges. The question is, how big is Tarsus? I mean, you've seen it from the images and from this map screen here. We actually saw a previous version of this top level view of Tarsus, and I must admit I quite like its design. I like the layout, I like the aesthetic of this, of sort of your top overworld map. map of Tarsus. It's pretty, and it also obviously links back to almost a very traditional type of map that you're holding in your hand of Tarsus. However, the question beckons with Tarsus, is it going to be big enough for gamers? Now, we know a social hub is not there. We know you're not going to be having a social hub of interactivity, but Fort Tarsis is actually quite the opposite. It's actually the anti-social hub. It's the hub where you learn your story, you learn your characters, you learn your lore, you collect your weapons, you forge your stuff, and you engage in conversation. So it's actually the area in which you spend your time, your personal story in. But is it actually a citadel? Is it comparable to previous creations of BioWare? Does it need to be comparable? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm kind of happy with the size I'm seeing, but at the same time, the Citadel was massive. It had so many areas and different sections, and Fort Tarsis in comparison seems a little bit claustrophobic. Now again, I don't think it's going to be a problem because it is, based on your story interaction. It's not meant to be full of hundreds of players running around interacting as a social hub. But it does beckon the question, is Fort Tarsis big enough? Is it going to be enough for the final game? And is it going to be enough for players in terms of what they see and do? More will be revealed, of course, as the game comes closer and that we all get a chance to spend more time inside Fort Tarsis and beyond. One thing I think you all should look out is the skybox in Tarsis. You won't see any of that in this gameplay other than the sky, but the cool thing I will tell you is the sky does change, and the elements do change during the day for you whilst you're inside Fort Tarsis. Simple little additions, but very, very welcome. I'm going to leave it at that, I think, in terms of Tarsus. I think we've spoken enough, but hopefully you've enjoyed today's little insight into where we've been, where it's going, some of our concerns, and ultimately expectations for Fort Tarsis when the game drops very, very shortly. We'll be seeing some more of this, of course, in the demo. If you want to check out Anthem Universe, as usual, we are at Anthem Universe on Twitter. Of course, jump on the Discord, be part of the conversation, which is discord.anthemuniverse.com, and of course, anthemuniverse.com for our dev tracker, countdown timer, and FAQ. I'm going to leave it at that. Javelins, freelancers, it's been a pleasure, but I will see you next over the wall.